Sometimes the most powerful people in the world are not sitting behind big desks or wearing heavy medals on their chests. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one standing quietly at the door, holding nothing but a piece of truth that can shake the walls. This is not a made-up story. This is not something written to entertain you for a few minutes and then forgotten. This is something that actually happened. And when you hear it, you will understand one thing very clearly. The world does not always listen to the loudest voice. Sometimes it listens to the quietest one, but only when that quiet voice refuses to stay silent. It was a woman named Farida. She was not famous. She was not rich. She was not connected to anyone powerful. She lived in a small town on the edge of a province that most people in the capital had never even heard of. Her house was made of mud walls and a tin roof that rattled every time the wind blew hard. She had 3 children, 2 daughters and 1 son. Her husband had been a soldier, not a high-ranking officer, not a general or a colonel, just a regular soldier. The kind of man who woke up before the sun, put on his boots, and walked to his post without complaining. The kind of man who followed every order he was given, even when the orders were hard, even when the orders were dangerous, even when the orders did not make sense to him. He believed in duty, he believed in service, and he believed that if he gave his life to the country would take care of his family. His name was Tariq, and Tariq was dead. He had died during a border operation, not in a big battle that made it to the newspapers, not in a dramatic firefight that the television channels talked about for days. He died during a small skirmish that nobody outside the military even noticed. A bullet hit him in the chest while he was running across open ground to help a fellow soldier who had been injured. He did not stop running when the first shot was fired. He did not stop when the second shot hit the dirt near his feet. He kept going, and then the third shot found him. He fell forward, his face hitting the dust, his hands still reaching out toward the man he was trying to save. They told Farida 3 days later. 2 officers came to her door. They stood stiff and straight and spoke in a formal voice. They told her that her husband had been brave. They told her that he had served with honor. They told her that the nation was grateful. And then they handed her a folded flag and a piece of paper. The paper said that she was entitled to a pension, a monthly payment from the government to support her and her children. It was not a lot of money, but it was something. And for a woman like Farida, who had no job and no education, and no family to fall back on, it was everything. But the pension never came. The first month passed. Farida waited. She thought, maybe it takes time. These things are not fast. The government has so many forms and so many offices and so many steps. She was patient. The second month passed. Still nothing. She went to the local government office and asked. The man behind the desk looked at her with bored eyes and told her to come back next week. She came back next week. He told her to come back next month. She came back next month. He told her the file was being processed. She asked how long it would take. He shrugged and said he did not know. By the 4th month, Farida was running out of food. Her children were hungry. Her oldest daughter, who was 12, had stopped going to school because Farida could not afford the small fee the school charged for books and supplies. Her youngest daughter, who was only 4, had gotten sick twice because the house was cold at night and there was no money for warm blankets or medicine. Her son, who was 8, had started working at a small shop in the market, carrying heavy bags for a few coins a day. He was too young for that kind of work. His back hurt, his hands were cracked. But he did it because he knew his mother was struggling. Farida went back to the government office. This time she did not just ask politely. She raised her voice. She told the man behind the desk that her husband had died for this country. She told him that she had a letter that said she was supposed to receive a pension. She told him that her children were hungry and sick and she needed help. The man looked at her and then looked at his watch and then looked at the line of people waiting behind her. He told her that he could not do anything. He told her the file was stuck somewhere. He told her to go to the district office and talk to someone there, and then he called the next person in line. Farida went to the district office. It was in the next town, an hour away by bus. She took the bus with the last bit of money she had. When she got there, the office was crowded. People were sitting on benches and standing in hallways and waiting in long lines that moved slower than anything she had ever seen. She waited for 4 hours. When she finally reached the counter, the woman there told her that her file had been sent back to the local office. It had not been filled out correctly. Some form was missing. Some stamp was not there. Some signature was needed. Farida felt something break inside her. Not her spirit, not yet. but something close to it. She went back home. She found the original papers they had given her when Tariq died. She looked at every page. She could not read most of the words because they were in legal language and she had only finished school up to the 5th grade. But she took the papers to a man in the town who could read well, and he helped her understand what was needed. She filled out the forms again. She got the stamps again. She walked to the local office again. This time the man behind the desk took the papers and put them in a brown folder and told her he would send them forward. He told her to wait. Again, she asked how long. He said maybe 2 months, maybe 3, maybe more. She asked if there was anything she could do to speed things up. He looked at her, and then he looked away, and then he said something that she would never forget. He said, "If you had someone important to speak for you, this would have been done in 1 day." She did not have someone important. She did not have anyone. She was alone. A widow with 3 children and a dead husband who had given his life for a country that could not even send her a monthly payment to keep her children fed. 6 more months passed. The pension still did not come. Farida had borrowed money from neighbors. She had sold the few pieces of jewelry she owned, including the thin gold bracelet that Tariq had given her on their wedding day. She had cried when she sold it. She had held it in her hand for a long time before she gave it to the shopkeeper. It was the last piece of Tariq she had. The last thing he had touched and smiled about and placed on her wrist with his own hands, and now it was gone. Her son had stopped going to school completely. He was working full-time at the shop now. He was 8 years old and carrying bags that were almost as heavy as he was. Her older daughter was helping a neighbor with housework in exchange for leftover food. Her youngest daughter was thin and quiet and had stopped playing the way children are supposed to play. She would just sit in the corner of the room and watch her mother with big, confused eyes, not understanding why the world had become so hard. Farida decided to go further. She had heard that there was a military office in the capital city where families of fallen soldiers could go for help. It was far away, very far. She would need money for the bus, money for food on the journey, money for a place to stay. She did not have any of it, but she went to the neighbors again. She went to the shopkeeper who had bought her bracelet. She went to everyone she knew and she told them what she was going to do. Most of them shook their heads. They told her she was wasting her time. They told her that people like them do not get hurt in the capital. They told her that the big offices are not for people who live in mud houses. But a few of them helped her. A few of them gave her what little they could. She gathered enough money for a one-way bus ticket and 2 days of food. She left her children with a neighbor and she got on the bus before sunrise. The journey took 11 hours. She sat by the window and watched the land change from dry fields to busy roads to tall buildings. She had never been to the capital before. When the bus stopped and she stepped out, she felt very small. The buildings were so tall. The streets were so wide. The people were walking so fast, all of them looking straight ahead, none of them looking at her. She found the military office the next morning. It was a large building with a gate and guards standing in front of it. She walked up to the gate and told the guard that she was the wife of a fallen soldier and she needed to speak to someone about her pension. The guard looked at her clothes. He looked at her dusty shoes. He looked at the small bag she was carrying, and then he told her to wait. She waited. An hour passed. 2 hours passed. The sun moved across the sky and the shadows grew longer, and still nobody came to talk to her. Finally, a junior officer came out. He was young and his uniform was very clean and his boots were very shiny. He asked her what she wanted. She explained everything. She told him about Tariq. She told him about the pension. She told him about the forms and the officers and the waiting. She showed him all the papers she had brought with her. He took the papers and looked at them quickly, the way someone looks at something they do not really care about. Then he handed them back and said that this matter was handled by a different department, and she should go there instead. He gave her an address on a piece of paper and went back inside. Farida went to the other office. It was across the city. She walked because she could not afford another bus. It took her almost 2 hours on foot. When she got there, the office was closed. A sign on the door said it opened at 9 in the morning. It was already 4 in the afternoon. She would have to come back tomorrow, but she had no place to stay. She sat on the steps outside the office and she waited. Night came. The air got cold. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and she leaned against the wall and she tried to sleep. She could not sleep. She kept thinking about her children. She kept thinking about Tariq. She kept wondering if this trip was a mistake. Maybe the neighbors were right. Maybe people like her Do not get hurt. But then she thought about Tariq. She thought about the way he used to talk about duty. He used to say that a person should never give up just because the road is hard. He used to say that the road is supposed to be hard. That is how you know you are going somewhere that matters. She closed her eyes and she held on to those words. And she waited for morning. When the office opened, she was the first person in line. She went inside and sat down in front of a desk where a civilian clerk was organizing files. She started to explain her situation again. The clerk listened for about 2 minutes and then interrupted her. He asked her for a reference number. She did not have one. He asked her for a case file number. She did not have that either. He told her that without these numbers, he could not look up anything in the system. He told her to go back to the local office and get the numbers and then come back. Farida felt the tears rising in her eyes. She had traveled 11 hours. She had walked across the city. She had slept on a cold step. And now she was being told to go back to the same office that had been ignoring her for almost a year. She asked the clerk if there was anyone else she could talk to. Anyone higher up. Anyone with the authority to help her. The clerk shook his head. He said, "The process is the process. Everyone has to follow it. There are no shortcuts." She left the office and stood on the street, and for the first time in all those months she cried, not quietly, not the kind of crying you do when you are trying to be strong. She cried the way a person cries when they have reached the very bottom and there is nothing left to hold on to. People walked past her. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked what was wrong. She was invisible. A woman from a small town, standing on a big city street, crying, and nobody cared. But Farida did something that day that would change everything. She did not go home. She wiped her face with the edge of her shawl. She straightened her back, and she started walking again. This time she was not walking toward another office. She was walking toward the main military headquarters, the place where the generals worked, the place where the big decisions were made. She did not know exactly where it was, but she asked people on the street and they pointed her in the right direction. When she reached the headquarters, she saw that it was surrounded by high walls and armed guards and security checkpoints. She knew she could not just walk in. She knew that a woman like her would never be allowed past the gate. But she went to the gate anyway. She stood there and she told the guard that she needed to see someone. Not a clerk, not a junior officer. She needed to see someone who had the power to make things right. The guard told her to leave. He said civilians were not allowed. He said she should go to the proper channels. She said she had been to the proper channels and the proper channels had failed her. The guard raised his voice and told her to step back. Another guard came over and told her that if she did not leave, they would have to remove her. She looked at both of them and she said something that made them pause. She said, "My husband died wearing the same uniform you are wearing right now, and I am not leaving until someone tells me why his family does not matter." The guards did not know what to say. They looked at each other. One of them went inside. A few minutes later, a captain came out. He was more polite than the guards. He asked her to explain. She told him everything. He listened, and then he said that he understood her frustration. But the general was a very busy man and he could not see every person who came to the gate. He said he would try to get her case looked at. He took her name and Tariq's name and his service number, and he said someone would contact her. Then he asked her to leave. Farida looked at the captain, and she knew that nobody was going to contact her. She had heard promises like this before. She had heard them so many times that the words had lost all meaning. But she also knew that she could not force her way past armed guards into a military headquarters. So she turned around and she walked away. But she did not go home. Not yet. She found a small park nearby and she sat on a bench and she thought. She thought for a long time. She thought about what she had and what she did not have. She did not have money. She did not have connections. She did not have power. But she had something. She reached into her small bag and she pulled out a cloth pouch. Inside the pouch was something she had been carrying with her since the day Tariq died. Something the officers had given her, along with the flag and the letter. Something she had kept close to her heart for all these months. It was Tariq's military medal, a small bronze star with his name and his unit number engraved on the back. It was not a big medal. It was not the kind of medal that generals wear. It was a simple service medal given to soldiers who had shown courage in the field, but it was Tariq's. It had his name on it, and it meant that somewhere in the records of this country, there was proof that a man named Tariq had served and fought and died and earned this piece of metal. Farida held the medal in her hand and she looked at it for a long time, and then she made a decision. She was going to come back to this gate tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. She was going to stand at that gate every single day until someone with real power looked her in the eye and answered her question. She was not going to shout. She was not going to cause trouble. She was just going to stand there, holding that medal, and wait. Because she had learned one thing in all these months of being ignored and dismissed and turned away. She had learned that the world does not listen to people who go away quietly. The world listens to people who stay. And so, the next morning, when the sun came up over the capital city, Farida was already standing at the gate of the military headquarters. She was wearing the same clothes. She was carrying the same small bag, and in her hand, held up where everyone could see it, was the bronze star with her dead husband's name on it. The guards saw her and they frowned. They told her to leave again. She did not leave. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She just stood there, silent still, holding the medal, and she waited. The first day was the hardest, not because of the heat or the standing or the hunger. It was hard because nobody cared. People walked past her like she was a lamppost. Officers drove in and out of the gate in their clean vehicles with their tinted windows, and not a single one of them slowed down to ask why a woman was standing outside the headquarters holding a bronze medal in the air. The guards changed shifts twice. The morning guards told the afternoon guards about her. The afternoon guards told the night guards. They all looked at her with the same expression. Some looked annoyed. Some looked pitiful. None of them looked like they were going to help. Farida stood from early morning until the sun went down. Her legs ached. Her feet swelled inside her worn shoes. Her arm got tired from holding up the medal, so she switched arms. When both arms got tired, she held it against her chest, but she never put it away. She never hid it. She wanted everyone who walked through that gate to see it. She wanted them to know that this small piece of bronze was earned with blood. When night came, she walked back to the park and slept on the same bench. She ate the last piece of bread she had in her bag. She drank water from a public tap near the park entrance. She thought about calling the neighbor who was watching her children, but she did not have a phone. She had given her neighbor the number of a woman who lived 2 houses down and had a phone. And she had told her neighbor to call that woman if there was an emergency. She hoped there was no emergency. She hoped her children were eating. She hoped her oldest daughter was keeping the little one warm at night. The second day, Farida was back at the gate. Same spot. Same medal. Same silence. The guards did not bother telling her to leave anymore. They just watched her from a distance. A few of them whispered to each other and shook their heads. Around midday, a young soldier who was walking out of the compound stopped near her. He looked at her for a moment and then he looked at the medal in her hand. He asked her whose medal it was. She told him it was her husband's. He asked what happened. She told him. The young soldier listened, and then he reached into his pocket and pulled out some money and tried to give it to her. She shook her head. She told him she was not there for money. She was there for what was owed to her husband. The soldier stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do, and then he put the money back and walked away. But he looked back at her twice before he disappeared around the corner. On the third day, something small happened. A woman who worked inside the compound, a civilian employee who handled paperwork, came out during her lunch break and brought Farida a bottle of water and a sandwich. She did not say much. She just handed them over and said, "I heard about you. I am sorry." Farida thanked her and ate the sandwich slowly, standing in the same spot, still holding the medal. The woman went back inside and Farida never saw her again. But that small act of kindness was enough to keep her going for the rest of the day. On the fourth day, things changed. Not in the way Farida had hoped, but they changed. A senior officer, a major, came out to the gate and asked to speak with her. He was polite but firm. He told her that she was creating a disturbance. He told her that standing outside the military headquarters like this was not appropriate. He told her that there were proper procedures for these kinds of grievances, and she should follow them. Farida looked at him and said that she had followed them. She said she had followed every procedure she had been told about for the last 10 months. She said she had gone to every office, filled out every form, waited in every line, and still nothing had happened. She said the procedures had failed her. The major was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he would look into her case personally. He took down the details again. Tariq's name, his unit, his service number. the date of his death, the pension reference. He wrote everything in a small notebook and told Farida to go home and wait. He said he would make sure someone followed up within 2 weeks. Farida looked at his face. She had become very good at reading faces over the past year. She could tell when someone meant what they said, and when they were just saying words to make her go away. This major was somewhere in between. He was not lying. He probably did intend to look into it. But he was also a busy man with 100 other things on his plate, and the chances of him actually remembering a widow's pension case in 2 weeks were very small. She told him she appreciated his words. She told him she would give him 2 weeks. But she also told him that if nothing happened in 2 weeks, she would be back. He nodded and went inside. Farida stayed until evening and then went back to the park. She had run out of money now. She had nothing left for food. That night she went to sleep hungry. The next morning she found a small mosque near the park where they gave free breakfast to poor people. She ate there and thanked the people who served her. Then she went back to the gate. She had decided to give the major his 2 weeks. She would not stand at the gate during those 2 weeks. She would wait. She would trust one more time. But she could not go home. She did not have money for the bus. She was stuck in the capital with no money, no place to stay, and no way to get back to her children. She thought about begging on the street, but something inside her would not let her do that. Her husband had been a soldier. He had dignity even in death. She would not throw that dignity away by sitting on a footpath with her hand out. She went back to the mosque and asked if she could help with cleaning or cooking in exchange for meals. The imam there was a kind old man with a white beard and gentle eyes. He listened to her story, and he did not turn her away. He told her she could help in the kitchen, and she could sleep in a small room at the back of the mosque that was used for travelers and people who had nowhere else to go. It was not comfortable. It was a hard floor with a thin mat and a single blanket. But it was a roof over her head, and she was grateful. For 2 weeks, Farida worked at the mosque. She cooked and cleaned and served food to others who, like her, had come to the capital with nothing and were struggling to survive. She met people with stories as hard as her own. A man who had lost his farm to a flood and was trying to get compensation from the government. A woman whose son had been wrongly arrested and she was trying to get him released. An old couple whose house had been taken by a builder who had connections with a local politician. All of them were fighting the same fight. All of them were trying to be heard by a system that did not want to listen. The 2 weeks passed. Farida went back to the military headquarters. She asked to see the major. She waited at the gate for 3 hours. Finally, a message came back. The major was not available. He was on assignment somewhere. His office said that the case had been forwarded to the relevant department and it was being processed. Being processed. Those 2 words again. The same words she had been hearing for a year. Words that meant nothing. Words that were used to make people go away without actually doing anything. Farida stood at the gate again. This time, she did not give anyone a deadline. She just stood there with a medal in her hand, and she waited. Morning came and she was there. Afternoon came and she was there. Evening came and she was still there. The guards had stopped talking to her completely. She had become part of the scenery to them. Just another desperate person standing outside a building full of powerful people who could not be bothered to look down. A week went by. Every day, Farida stood at the gate. Every night she went back to the mosque. The imam had become something like a friend to her. There. In the evenings, he would sit with her and they would talk. He told her that she was doing a brave thing. He also told her that she should not destroy her health over it. She was getting thinner. Her face was drawn. Her eyes had dark circles under them. She was not sleeping well. She was not eating enough. The stress and the grief and the anger were eating her alive. But she would not stop. On the 9th day of her second stretch at the gate, a car pulled up, not from the outside going in, but from inside the compound coming out. It was a large black vehicle with small flags on the front, the kind of car that important people ride in. The guard at the gate snapped to attention and saluted as the vehicle approached. Farida was standing a few meters to the side of the gate, where the guards had told her to stand so she would not block the entrance. The car slowed down as it reached the gate, and something happened that nobody expected. The car stopped, not because of traffic, not because of a security check. It stopped because the person inside had seen something through the window. Farida did not know this at the time. She did not know who was in the car. She was just standing there the way she did every day, holding the medal, looking straight ahead. The rear window of the car rolled down, and a face appeared. It was the face of an older man. He had grey hair cut short and deep lines around his eyes, and a jaw that looked like it had been set firm for 40 years. He was wearing a uniform covered in medals and ribbons and stars, more medals than Farida had ever seen on one person. He looked at her, not the quick glance that most people gave her before looking away. He looked at her the way a person looks at something that has suddenly disturbed a thought they were having. His eyes went from her face to her hand, to the medal she was holding. The car sat there for what felt like a very long time, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then the window went back up and the car drove away. Farida did not know what had just happened. She did not know if it meant anything. She did not even know who the man in the car was. She just kept standing. But inside that car, something had shifted. The man in the back seat had leaned back and gone quiet. His aide, who was sitting next to the driver, noticed the change. The general was not a man who went quiet easily. He was known for talking, for giving orders, for filling rooms with his voice. When he went silent, it meant something was happening inside his head that he had not planned for. The aide asked if everything was all right. The general did not answer right away. Then he said, "That woman at the gate. Find out who she is and why she is there." The aide nodded and made a note. By that evening, the aide had gathered the information. He brought a file to the general's office. The general was sitting behind his large desk, still in his uniform, reviewing reports from a border exercise. The aide placed the file on the desk and said, "The woman at the gate, sir. Her name is Farida. Her husband was Corporal Tariq Ahmed. He was killed in action 11 months ago during a border skirmish in the northern sector. She has been trying to get his pension processed since his death. She has been to the local office, the district office, the pension department, and the welfare office here in the capital. The file has been bouncing between departments for almost a year. She has been standing at our gate for nearly 3 weeks now." He read slowly. He looked at Tariq's service record. He looked at the details of the operation where Tariq had died. He looked at the pension application and the forms and the stamps and the rejections and the referrals. He saw the entire trail of failure. A simple case of a fallen soldier's widow asking for what she was legally owed, and the system had failed her in every possible way. Then the general looked at a photograph that was attached to the file. It was a photograph of Tariq in his uniform, a young man with a serious face and steady eyes. The general stared at that photograph for a long time. His aide noticed that the general's hand, which was usually rock steady, had a slight tremor. The general closed the file and sat back in his chair. He was quiet for nearly a minute. Then he spoke. His voice was different now. It was lower, rougher, like something had caught in his throat and he was trying to push past it. He said, "Do you know what medal she was holding?" The aide said it appeared to be a service medal, the kind given for courage under fire. The general nodded slowly. Then he said something that the aide would remember for the rest of his career. He said, "That medal, I know that medal. Not the specific one, but I know what it means to earn it. I earned my first one when I was 23 years old, in a situation that nearly killed me, and I was one of the lucky ones. I lived to collect mine. Her husband did not. And now we cannot even pay his widow what she is owed." He stood up from his desk and walked to the window. Outside, the compound was quiet. The flag was flying in the evening breeze. Somewhere beyond the walls, a woman was probably walking back to whatever place she was sleeping, carrying a dead soldier's medal in her hand, getting ready to come back tomorrow and stand at the gate again. The general turned to his aide and said, "I want her pension processed and paid by the end of this week. I do not care what forms are missing. I do not care what department is supposed to handle it. I want it done. And I want a full review of every pending pension case for fallen soldiers in the last 3 years. Every single one. If there are others like her, I want to know about it." The aide began writing everything down. The general was not finished. He said, "And tomorrow morning, I want her brought to my office. Not to the welfare desk. Not to a clerk. To my office. I want to speak to her myself." The aide looked up from his notebook. In all his years of working with this general, he had never seen him asked to personally meet with a pension case. This was a man who dealt with national security, border strategies, and troop deployments. He did not handle paperwork for individual soldiers. That was many levels below him. But the look in the general's eyes made it clear that this was not a request, it was an order. That night, Farida slept at the mosque as usual. She helped serve dinner. She washed the dishes. She prayed. She lay on the thin mat and stared at the ceiling and wondered how many more days she could keep going. Her body was tired in a way that sleep could not fix. She missed her children so much that it felt like a physical pain in her chest. She had been away from them for almost 3 weeks now, and she did not even know how they were doing. Were they eating? Were they safe? Was her youngest daughter still getting sick? Was her son still working at that shop? She pressed her hands against her eyes and tried not to cry. She had cried enough. Tears did not fix anything. She needed to be strong for one more day. Just one more day. She did not know that tomorrow would be different from every other day that had come before it. The next morning, Farida walked to the gate at her usual time. She stood in her usual spot. She held the medal in her usual way. The guards were at their usual posts. Everything looked the same as it had looked for the past 3 weeks. But then, about an hour after she arrived, a military vehicle pulled up to the gate from inside the compound. A young officer stepped out. He walked over to her. He was not rude. He was not dismissive. He looked at her with something she had not seen in any official face for a long time. He looked at her with respect. He said, "Are you Farida, wife of Corporal Tariq Ahmed?" She said yes, her heart suddenly beating faster, not knowing if this was good or bad. The officer said, "Ma'am, the general would like to see you." "Would you please come with me?" Farida did not move for a moment. She was not sure she had heard correctly. She asked, "Which general?" The officer told her the name. It was a name she had heard on the news. It was the name of one of the highest-ranking military officers in the country. The kind of name that makes people sit up straighter. The kind of name that opens doors and moves mountains. She looked at the officer, and then she looked at the gate that she had been staring at for 3 weeks. The gate that had never opened for her. And now, it was opening. She took a breath. She held the medal tightly in her hand, and she followed the officer through the gate. The compound inside was different from what she had imagined. She had pictured it as cold and harsh and military, and it was all of those things. But it was also clean and organized and quiet in a way that made her feel like she had stepped into another world. There were buildings with neat edges and pathways lined with trimmed bushes, and soldiers walking in straight lines with their shoulders back and their eyes forward. The officer led her to a building that was larger than the others. They went through a door and down a hallway and past several rooms where people were working at desks and talking on phones and staring at computers. Nobody looked at her. The officer stopped at a door at the end of the hallway. He knocked. A voice from inside said, "Come in." The officer opened the door and stepped aside to let Farida enter. She walked in, and the first thing she noticed was how big the room was. The second thing she noticed was the desk. It was enormous, made of dark wood, and covered with files and maps and papers. Behind the desk there were flags, the national flag and the military flag standing side by side, and behind the flags on the wall there were photographs. Photographs of soldiers in the field, of military operations, of ceremonies and parades and handshakes with important people. And behind the desk, sitting in a large chair, was the general, the same man she had seen through the car window the day before. He was wearing his full uniform, with all his medals. His face was serious but not unkind. His eyes were watching her the way a person watches something they are trying to understand. He stood up when she entered. That detail was important, and Farida noticed it. A 3-star general stood up from his chair when a widow from a mud house walked into his office. He stood up the way you stand up for someone who deserves respect. He said, "Please, sit down." He pointed to a chair in front of his desk. Farida sat down. Her hands were trembling. The medal was still in her right hand, gripped so tightly that the edges were pressing into her skin. The general sat back down. He did not speak right away. He looked at her face. He looked at her clothes. He looked at her hands. He looked at the medal. And then he took a deep breath. The kind of breath a person takes when they are about to say something that is difficult. He said, "I saw you yesterday, through my car window. I saw you standing at the gate, and I saw what was in your hand." He paused. "I want you to know that I am ashamed." Farida did not expect those words. She blinked. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. The general continued. He said, "Your husband gave his life for this country, and his country could not even give his wife the pension she was promised. That is a failure. Not your failure. Our failure. And I am sorry." Farida felt the tears come. She had been holding them back for so long. She had been strong for so many months. She had stood at gates and sat in offices and walked across cities and slept on cold floors, and she had not broken. But now, sitting in this enormous office, in front of this powerful man who was saying sorry to her, the walls she had built around her heart cracked open and everything came flooding out. She cried. And the general did not look away. He did not call for someone to bring water or tissues or to take her out of the room. He just sat there and let her cry, because he understood that those tears were not weakness. Those tears were the weight of a year of fighting a battle she should never have had to fight. When the crying stopped, Farida wiped her face with the edge of her shawl and straightened her back. She looked at the general and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt seen. For the first time in almost a year of walking from office to office and being treated like a nuisance, someone with real authority was sitting across from her and acknowledging that what had happened to her was wrong. Not just unfortunate, not just a delay. Wrong. The general leaned forward in his chair and folded his hands on the desk. He asked her to tell him everything, from the beginning. Not the short version she had been giving to clerks and officers who only half listened. He wanted the full story. Every detail. Every office she visited. Every form she filled out. Every person who turned her away. Every night she spent wondering how she was going to feed her children. He said he wanted to hear all of it because he needed to understand how the system had broken so badly that a soldier's widow had to stand outside his gate for 3 weeks just to be noticed. Farida told him everything. She started from the day the 2 officers came to her door with a folded flag in the letter. She told him about the first visit to the local office and the man with the bored eyes. She told him about the district office and the missing forms and the wrong stamps. She told him about her son carrying bags at the market and her daughter dropping out of school and her youngest sitting in the corner of the room with confused eyes. She told him about borrowing money for the bus ticket to the capital. She told him about the junior officer who sent her to a different address. She told him about walking 2 hours across the city. She told him about sleeping on the step outside the closed office. She told him about the clerk who told her to go back and get reference numbers she did not have. She told him about the major who promised to help and then disappeared on assignment. She told him about the mosque where the imam let her stay and the kitchen where she cooked meals for other people who were also fighting to be heard. She told him about standing at the gate day after day, holding up the only thing she had left of her husband, a small bronze medal that nobody seemed to care about. The general listened without interrupting. His face did not change much while she talked, but his eyes changed. They got darker, not with anger directed at her, but with something else. Something that looked like a man realizing that the institution he had given his life to had a deep crack running through its foundation, and he had not seen it until this moment. When Farida finished talking, the room was quiet. The general sat still for a long time. Then he picked up the phone on his desk and called his aide. He told the aide to come to his office immediately. The aide arrived within a minute. The general did not waste any words. He told the aide that Farida's pension was to be activated within 48 hours. Not processed, not forwarded, activated. The money was to appear in an account in her name before the end of the week. He also told the aide to arrange immediate back payment for all the months that had been missed. Every single month from the day Tariq died until today, he told the aide to calculate the total and make sure it was correct and make sure it was deposited into her account along with the first regular payment. The aide wrote everything down. The general was not finished. He told the aide to arrange transportation for Farida back to her hometown. A military vehicle, not a bus. He told the aide to send someone from the welfare department to visit her home within 1 week to assess the family's condition. He wanted to know if the children were in school. He wanted to know if the house was livable. He wanted to know if there was anything else the family needed. He told the aide to put it all in writing and to send him a personal report. The aide nodded and left the room. Farida sat in her chair, still holding the medal, still trying to process what was happening. It had happened so fast. After months and months of nothing, everything was suddenly moving at a speed she could not keep up with. She looked at the general and she did not know what to say. She wanted to thank him, but the words felt too small for what she was feeling. The general saw the expression on her face and he shook his head. He said, "Do not thank me. What I am doing today should have been done the day your husband died. You should never have had to fight for this. A soldier falls in the line of duty and the very next day, the very next hour, his family should be taken care of. That is not charity. That is not a favor. That is the promise this uniform makes." and we broke that promise." He stood up from his desk and walked around to where she was sitting. He pulled a chair and sat down next to her, not behind his big desk with all his files and maps and medals between them, next to her, as an equal. He asked her if he could see the medal. She hesitated for a moment, and then she placed it in his open hand. He held it carefully, like it was made of something far more valuable than bronze. He turned it over and read the engraving on the back. Tariq's name, his unit, the date. The general looked at the medal for a long time. Then he said something that Farida would carry with her for the rest of her life. He said, "I have many medals. You can see them on my uniform. Some of them were given to me by presidents and prime ministers and foreign dignitaries, but none of my medals are as heavy as this one. Because this one cost a man his life and a woman her husband and 3 children their father. This is the heaviest medal in this room." He placed the medal back in her hand and closed her fingers around it gently. He told her that Tariq was a hero. Not the kind of hero who gets statues and streets named after him. The real kind. The kind who runs toward danger to save a friend. The kind who does not hesitate even when the bullets are flying. The kind who gives everything and asks for nothing in return. He told her that she should be proud of him. And then he told her something else. He told her that she was also a hero, because what she had done, standing at that gate for 3 weeks, refusing to be ignored, refusing to go away, that took a kind of courage that most people do not have, including some of the soldiers inside this compound. Farida held the medal against her chest, and she nodded. She did not trust herself to speak because she knew the tears would come again. The general understood. He stood up and called his aide again and made sure everything was being arranged. A car would take Farida back to the mosque to collect her things and then drive her all the way home to her town. The journey that had taken her 11 hours on a crowded bus would take about 5 hours in a military vehicle. She would be home before dark. She would see her children tonight. Before she left the office, the general did one more thing. He opened a drawer in his desk and took out a small card. He wrote something on it and handed it to her. It was his direct phone number. He told her that if she ever had a problem, if the pension stopped coming, if anyone gave her trouble, if she needed anything at all, she was to call this number and he would take care of it personally. Farida took the card and looked at it, and then she looked at him.
He said, "Thank you, not just for me."
"For Tariq?" The general nodded. Then he walked her to the door of his office and opened it for her himself. The aide was waiting outside. He took Farida to the car. She collected her things from the mosque and said goodbye to the imam who had been so kind to her. The imam smiled and said he was happy for her and that he would pray for her family. She thanked him and got in the car and watched through the window as the capital city, the city that had been so cold and so hard and so indifferent to her, slowly disappeared behind her. The drive home was quiet. The driver did not talk much, and Farida did not feel like talking. She held the medal in one hand and the general's card in the other, and she watched the land change from tall buildings to busy roads to open fields. The same journey she had made weeks ago on a crowded bus. Hungry and afraid and alone. Now she was going back, and everything was different. Not because the world had changed. The world was still the same. The officers were still slow. The clerks were still careless. The system was still broken. But in the middle of all that brokenness, one person had looked at her and chosen to do the right thing, and that had been enough. She arrived at her town in the early evening. The military vehicle pulled up to her mud house and the driver helped her out and carried her small bag to the door. The neighbors saw the military car and came out of their houses, staring with wide eyes. They did not know what was happening. Some of them probably thought Farida was in trouble, but when they saw her face, when they saw the small, tired smile on her lips, they knew something good had happened. Her children heard the noise and came running out. Her oldest daughter reached her first and threw her arms around her. Her son came next, his small hands still rough from working at the shop, and he grabbed onto her waist and did not let go. And her youngest daughter, the 4-year-old who had been so quiet and so confused, came toddling out last, blinking in the evening light, and when she saw her mother, she started to cry. Not a sad cry, the cry of a child who has been waiting, and finally the waiting is over. Farida knelt on the ground and gathered all 3 of them in her arms, and held them so tightly that she could feel their heartbeats against her own. She did not say anything. She just held them, and for the first time in almost a year, the house felt warm. The pension came through exactly as the general had promised. Within 3 days, the back payment appeared in Farida's new bank account. It was more money than she had ever seen in one place. She did not spend it carelessly. She paid back every neighbor who had lent her money. She bought warm blankets and food that would last. She paid the school fees for all 3 of her children and bought them new books and supplies. Her son stopped working at the shop. Her oldest daughter went back to school. Her youngest daughter, who had been thin and quiet, started eating better, and within a few weeks the color came back to her cheeks and she started playing again, the way children are supposed to play. The regular monthly pension started the following month and it came on time every month without fail. Farida never had to go to another government office to ask about it. It just came, like clockwork. Like a promise finally being kept. The welfare officer visited within the week, just as the general had ordered. He looked at the house and wrote a detailed report. A month later, Farida received a letter saying that her house would be repaired under a military family welfare program. Workers came and fixed the roof that had been rattling in the wind. They strengthened the walls and added a proper door and repaired the windows. It was still a simple house, but it was safe now. It was solid. Farida also received a letter from the education department saying that her children's school fees would be covered under a scholarship program for children of fallen soldiers. She had not even asked for this. Someone in the system, maybe the general himself or maybe someone who had been moved by her story, had put the pieces in motion. Her children would be able to go to school without her worrying about how to pay for it. But the story did not end with Farida, and this is the part that matters most. The general did exactly what he said he would do. He ordered a full review of every pending pension case for families of soldiers who had been killed in action in the last 3 years. The results of that review were devastating. There were dozens of cases like Farida's. Widows who had been waiting for months, some for over a year, to receive pensions that they were legally entitled to. Children who had dropped out of school. Families who had fallen into poverty not because they were lazy or irresponsible, but because the system that was supposed to take care of them had simply stopped working. The general took the report personally. He did not hand it off to a committee or file it away for later review. He sat with it for days. He went through every case. And then he did something that shocked the military bureaucracy. He called a meeting of every department head involved in the pension process, and he laid the report on the table, and he told them that what he was looking at was not a paperwork problem. It was a moral failure. He told them that every day a soldier's family went without their rightful pension. The institution they all served lost a piece of its credibility. He told them that if they could not take care of the people who sacrificed the most, they had no business asking anyone else to sacrifice anything. Changes were made. Not overnight and not perfectly, because systems do not change overnight and nothing works perfectly. But they were real changes. The pension process was streamlined. The number of forms was reduced. The number of offices a family had to visit was cut in half. A dedicated helpline was set up for families of fallen soldiers so they would not have to travel to the capital and stand outside gates to be heard. Regional welfare officers were assigned to each area to follow up on cases locally. And a new rule was put in place that said every pension application for a fallen soldier's family had to be processed and paid within 30 days of the soldier's death. Not 10 months. Not a year. 30 days. Not all of these changes lasted. Some of them were watered down over time, the way reforms often are when the person pushing them moves on or retires or gets transferred. The system is imperfect and it always will be, but for a period of time things got better, and for the families who were helped during that period, the change was everything. As for Farida, she went back to her quiet life. She did not become famous. She did not appear on television, or give interviews, or write a book. She was never interested in any of that. She was just a woman who wanted what was owed to her husband, and she got it. She raised her 3 children in that small house with the repaired roof. Her oldest daughter finished school and went on to study at a college in the provincial capital. Her son, the boy who had been carrying heavy bags at the market when he was 8 years old, grew up strong and serious. And when he turned 18, he did something that made Farida cry in a way she had not cried since the day in the general's office. He enlisted in the army. He walked into the recruitment office in his town and he signed his name and he put on the uniform. And he became a soldier, just like his father. Farida was afraid. Of course she was. She knew better than anyone what that uniform could cost. She had buried a husband who wore it, but she also understood why her son had chosen this path. He had grown up with the memory of a father who believed in duty and service and sacrifice. He had grown up hearing stories about a man who ran across open ground under fire to help a friend. He had grown up holding a bronze medal that had his father's name on it. That medal had shaped him. It had taught him that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act even when you are afraid. Her youngest daughter grew into a bright and talkative girl who loved to read and who had completely forgotten the days when she used to sit silently in the corner of the room with confused eyes. She was happy and healthy and full of life, and every night before she went to sleep, she would look at the small photograph of her father in his uniform that Farida had framed and placed on a shelf in the main room of the house. She did not remember him. She had been too young when he died. But she knew who he was, because her mother had made sure she knew. Farida kept the general's card for years. She never had to use it. The pension came every month and nobody gave her trouble. But she kept the card in the same cloth pouch where she kept the medal, tucked away safely. A reminder that sometimes the right person sees the right thing at the right moment and everything changes. She also kept something else, the memory of standing at that gate, day after day under the sun, holding a small piece of bronze in the air while the world walked past her. Some people might look at those weeks and see suffering. Farida looked at them differently. She saw them as the weeks she discovered who she really was. Not a helpless widow, not a victim, not someone who needed to be saved. She was someone who could stand in front of a wall that was bigger than her and refuse to move until the wall made way. She was someone who could take the heaviest thing in her life, the loss of the person she loved most, and use it as a tool to break through every barrier that stood between her children and the life they deserved. The imam at the mosque would sometimes tell new people who came to stay there about the woman who had cooked in his kitchen for 2 weeks while she fought to get her husband's pension. He would tell them about how she stood at the military gate every day with a medal in her hand. He would tell them that she was the bravest person he had ever met, braver than any general or soldier, because she had fought her battle completely alone and with nothing but her own 2 feet and her own stubborn heart. And when people asked him what happened to her, he would smile and say, "She won." The general retired a few years later. At his retirement ceremony, surrounded by officers and dignitaries and politicians, he gave a speech. He talked about his career. He talked about the battles he had fought and the decisions he had made and the soldiers he had served with. But at the end of his speech, he told a story that nobody in the audience expected. He told the story of a woman who stood at his gate with a bronze medal. He did not mention her name because he respected her privacy. But he described the look on her face, the steadiness in her eyes, the way she held that medal like it was the most important object in the world. And then he said something that made the room go very quiet. He said, "In my entire career, I have given orders that moved thousands of soldiers across borders. I have planned operations that were carried out over land and sea and air. I have sat in rooms where the fate of this nation was discussed and decided. But the moment I am most proud of, the moment that I believe defined my service more than any medal or promotion or victory, was the morning I told my aide to open the gate for a woman who had been standing outside it for 3 weeks. Because on that morning I was reminded of why we wear this uniform in the first place. We wear it to protect people like her. And if we cannot do that, then the uniform means nothing." The audience was silent. A few people had tears in their eyes. The general stepped down from the podium and the ceremony ended and people shook hands and said polite things and went their separate ways. But the story he told that night traveled. It passed from person to person, the way important stories do, changing slightly with each telling but never losing its core. The story of a woman who refused to be invisible. The story of a medal that made a general go still. And somewhere in a small town far from the capital, a woman with grey streaks in her hair and calm eyes sat in a house with a repaired roof, watching her youngest daughter read a book by lamplight. On the shelf across the room, next to the photograph of a young man in a uniform, there was a small bronze star. It had been polished recently. It always looked polished, because Farida cleaned it every week. She would take it down from the shelf and hold it in her hands and turn it over and read the name on the back, even though she knew the name by heart. And then she would polish it with a soft cloth until it shone. And she would place it back on the shelf and step back and look at it and nod. It was small. It was simple. It was just a piece of metal with a name on it. But it had carried her through the hardest year of her life. It had opened a gate that nothing else could open. It had made a powerful man stop his car and look. It had reminded an entire institution of its promise. And it had taught Farida something she would never forget, that sometimes the smallest things carry the heaviest weight, and sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who changes everything.